My name is Andrew Williams. Today we'll be talking about getting started with a home lab. A little bit about me. I've been in IT and information security for over 13 years. I've got a degree in management of information systems from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I have a collection of certs, and I'm a nerd with a lab. I've been working with home labs for over 13 years, starting with some Server 2003 machines about 13 years ago. And this is kind of the talk that I wish I had seen when I got started. Sort of some things that I wish I had known about and known to avoid. So hopefully y'all will find this out. We're going to talk about how to get started with a home lab, how to move on to more advanced hardware, things to fill your lab with VM-wise, additional pieces of hardware and software you may want to add to your lab, and finally we'll touch on some projects you may want to tackle once you've got this stood up. So why build a home lab? First and foremost, experience. You can learn things with a lab that directly translate into things you can put on your resume for your next potential employer. It lets you gain access to technologies you might not otherwise be able to access and afford. Especially like the Microsoft files, things like that. It's a great way to test things before you put them into production. And sometimes it's even fun. And with regard to the whole experience thing, there was a great story that got told once on the Paul Security Weekly podcast about Paul Assadorian getting his first job in IT because he had experience with a home lab. And I've definitely, not quite to that level, but definitely found my experience in home labs be useful and productive in my professional life. So when you're getting started, you may have everything you need already. All you really need to get started is a decent notebook or a desktop, whether it's Windows, Mac, or Linux, it doesn't really matter. Although if you do go the Mac route, what that also allows you to do is run Mac OS VMs. And that's becoming more and more of an interesting target these days, I feel. You need about 500 gigs of storage, as much RAM as you can get. I would say 16 gigs is probably the minimum. And a Core i5 or Core i7 processor. With that kind of a setup, I can easily run 3 VMs at a time on a system like this. And this is 2011 Mac, so it still hangs in there pretty well. And that's really all you need to get started on the hardware side. Something else to consider, though, when you're getting started are Raspberry Pis. These are $35 project computers that can run either Linux or BSDs. It's a great way to get your feet wet, learn some command line skills. But there's also a lot of information security concepts you can practice on a Raspberry Pi that directly translate to larger systems you might be securing in an enterprise. Locking down SSH on one of these, setting up your IP tables firewall, that sort of thing. There was a little bit of a brouhaha a while back. They were shipping these with SSH enabled, the same root password on all of these. So you learn a lot about things not to do with a Raspberry Pi. And again, it's $35. If you screw it up, go get a new SD card. Nobody cares. You're not going to get fired. Back over on the notebook and desktop side. When you're getting started, you're going to want software to run your VMs. That software is known as a hypervisor. In this scenario, you want a Type 2 hypervisor. That's one that runs on top of your OS, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux. In my opinion, the gold standard for this is still the VMware products, either Workstation on the Windows and Linux side or Fusion on the Mac. Workstation is going to run you about $250. Fusion is $80. Don't ask me why it's cheaper. I don't understand it either. It's got a great polish. It's got a nice set of features. You can roll back changes to your VMs, that sort of thing. It's just the one I'm most comfortable with. On the Windows side, for $0, VMware Player is a great option. Does not allow you to do rollbacks of the VMs. It's stripped down, but you can't beat it for the money. VirtualBox is another $0 option. It's cross-platform, Mac, Windows, and Linux. Does not quite have the polish or the fit and finish of the VMware offerings, but it's solid and it's usable, and I like it a lot. Parallels is another option on the Mac, but I've never used that. Hyper-V. This comes with Windows 10, either the Enterprise, Pro, or Education versions of Windows 10. It's another free option that's available baked in if you're running those versions of that operating system. I don't like it. I've set up labs for people using this. Everything just seems to be a little harder. Maybe that's because I'm coming from the VMware side of the house. You can get there, don't get me wrong. But things like getting the networking to behave, sharing files between the guest OS and the host OS, mounting drives even sometimes if you go to the later version of the Hyper-V virtual machines. It just all seems to be way harder than it needs to be in Hyper-V. As you move on past the notebook stage of doing things in labs, you may be tempted to go out and buy some hardware. Go to eBay or Tiger Direct. You can find refurbished 1 and 2U boxes. This is a strong temptation. But these kind of sound like these, if you've got them in a home office, and they suck down enough power to make him happy. So that plus the cooling concerns leads me to caution you not to do this. A much better option is desktops and laptops. If you're getting them at the end of a tech refresh cycle, they're 3 to maybe 5 years old. Plenty of life left in these, plenty of capacity. I've run Windows Server OSs even on relatively recent notebooks. And the nice thing about that is the battery kind of acts like a built-in UPS in the event of a power failure. I've got a notebook in my lab right now running the Server 2008 just because I can. What's really nice, though, when you really get serious, are these. These are Intel NUCs, the next unit of computing. If you're not familiar with these, they're almost literally a palm-sized computer. They're about the size of a Roku or an Apple TV, if you're familiar with those. And it's a lot of power in a really compact package. Very light on the power consumption. They're very quiet. Matter of fact, I think they're fanless. They're so small. And you can get a lot of power in a good package. For less than $1,000 on Newegg, you can get an i7 processor, 32 gigs of RAM, and 500 gigs of storage, and run half a dozen or more VMs on one of these at one time, easily. And it's the best value for the money. I can't tell you how much money I wasted building full-size towers to run VMs, and they're loud and they're noisy and they suck a lot of power. I wish I'd known about these. The one caveat with these is they do only have one built-in NIC on the back. It's a gigabit NIC, but there's only one of them. Now you can add through USB, you can add others. It's never been a problem for me, but just something to be aware of. At this level, what kind of a hypervisor do you use for the NUC? You're going to want a Type 1 hypervisor, or what's known as a bare metal hypervisor. In other words, there's no Windows, Mac, or Linux underneath it. The hypervisor is the operating system for the hardware, and you're not booting up into a GUI or a desktop or anything like that. There are two choices. VMware, again, kind of owns the gold standard status in this category. ESXi is in use in tons of enterprises. That's what I started with. I still have sort of a soft spot for ESXi. I use the skills I built working with ESXi in my lab to this day in my professional life. That said, they really like ESXi. They charge for a lot of the cooler features you'd want to play with. Things like being able to migrate VMs from one virtual host to another. You have to pay for that in ESXi. And that's why I prefer Citrix's Zen server. They're number 2, so they try a little harder. For free, you get the ability to move those VMs from one host to another. If you've got a couple of the NUCs or a NUC and something else running Zen server. The updates are a little bit easier as well. One note about Zen Server, it's built to be administered from a Windows host. So you can do that even from just a Windows VM. I administered it from a Windows VM on my Mac for years. Works just fine. But that is just something else to be aware of. Once you've got a hypervisor, either here or on a NUC, what are some things you're going to want to get a hold of? Kali Linux is the obvious choice. It's the first thing I always grab when I'm populating a lab, either for myself or someone else. Get a hold of those hacker tools, right? But then you've got Ubuntu and CentOS Linux, and I list both of those for a reason. In most enterprises, these are representative of what you're going to see. You're either going to see Debian-based Linuxes represented by Ubuntu, or you're going to see Red Hat Enterprise Linux derivatives represented by CentOS. In a lot of organizations, you're going to see a bit of both. And in a lot of organizations, they're going to have gone the cheap route and saved money on the Red Hat licenses and just deployed Cent. Fun fact I just learned the other day about that. Red Hat, if you give them money, will actually let you turn a CentOS license or a CentOS deployment into a supported Red Hat deployment. They will support you even if you install Cent. I always like to tell people there's two main branches of the Linux world. There's the distros that are updated using apps, and the distros who update using Yum. And again, this sort of covers both of those. I also always recommend people get a BSD, either FreeBSD or OpenBSD. For one thing, it's closer to a true Unix operating system. For another, I have heard more than once from pen testers, BSDs are just different enough that if you find yourself on one and you're expecting it to behave like Linux, it will throw you for a loop a little bit. It's weird in ways that don't initially make sense. So I always recommend people getting that experience with a BSD. Finally, virtual appliances are worth considering. VMware, for example, has a marketplace. You can download files that are basically virtual machines already set up. You don't have to step through an installer to get those up and running. Those are a variety of software packages, whether it's application suites or security products, what have you. It's a great resource. Over on the Windows side of the house, Windows XP is still a factor. Not only is it just straight up still in use in a lot of businesses, I saw it in a business this past Sunday. Hasn't been too long ago, I saw it at a dentist's office. It's still the basis for a lot of point-of-sale devices and ATMs. At least in those scenarios, it's still supported, thankfully. But it is something that you kind of want to still be sharpening your skills against, and we'll circle back to that in a moment.
2 or 3 years ago, the IRS was using it.
The British actually just deployed a warship, the HMS Queen Elizabeth II, and all of its systems are Windows XP systems, because it took that long to get a warship built. So, yeah. So a great resource is a project or an initiative called DreamSpark. I think they're changing the name now to Microsoft Imagine because Microsoft has only stayed with the same name for very long. What this is, if you have a valid.edu email address, you can get free full versions of Microsoft products. What you're able to get varies depending on what your learning institution has in way of an agreement with Microsoft, but they're always good for something. Maybe it's just an install of Windows Server 2016, maybe it's 2016 and Project and Windows 10, it just depends. You can also get evaluation software from Microsoft. These are usually time limited to about 180 days, which is more than enough time to stand up an AD configuration, work out the kinks, test whatever it is you need to test. Finally, there are the IE developer trials. These were derived so that web developers could test their code in varying versions of Internet Explorer and Edge. There'll be a link in the slides, and we'll make the slides available for anybody who wants them. There's some resource links at the end. There's a link. The drop-down for these no longer lets you select Windows XP, but the link to download the XP VM still works as of when I made these slides. So If you don't have a copy of XP laying around, here's a way to get it and sharpen your skills against it because it is still out there. Some other things to consider. You want to make that Windows machine look and feel more like a real machine you might encounter in an enterprise. A great way to go about that is Ninite. If you're not familiar with that, it's a website you can go to. You tell it, I'd like an Office suite, I'd like a media player, I'd like some alternative browsers. You get one install you download from Ninite. It goes out, downloads all the various files, installs them for you, and you're not having to click through half a dozen installers. Big time saver. Another great option is oldversion.com. That's a website where you can download older, obsolete versions of Windows software, get some things with some known vulnerabilities, practice your skills against things where you know how and why it's broken. Metasploitable. Rapid7 recently released their Metasploitable 3. It's a project on GitHub, and what that lets you do is, again, build this complete Windows VM. It has applications installed, it has tons of vulnerabilities, and it's a great tool for getting a hold of something that lets you sharpen your skills. Something else to consider is VulnHub. They've got a variety of vulnerable virtual machines, as the name might imply. And the reason I love VulnHub is I've seen some virtual machines that host Docker applications. That's becoming more and more of a factor in today's enterprises. So, get yourself some experience pen testing against Docker. Some more software to consider. ESXi and XenServer. Didn't we talk about these already? But you can actually run these in the hypervisor on a notebook. Why would you want to do this? You can gain experience with virtual machine clustering. You can actually have a VM inside of the ESXi, inside of Fusion. It's like a turducken, but that lets you play with moving virtual machines from hosts. These are enterprise-grade skills that people pay a lot of money for. There's a blogger by the name of Venus who has a whole great blog, and it's linked in the slides on how and why you'd want to do this. But again, get those skills with virtualization. That's never going away, folks. Some things you might want to add to your lab. Network attached storage, or NAS. Not only does it make it possible to enable VM migration on things like ESXi and XenServer, but it also gives you a place to store your stuff. I like FreeNAS. FreeNAS is a free BSD-based piece of software. It's available for free. IX Systems puts it out. It's the community version of a product they sell to lots of name brand organizations on their website. They've got logos for all kinds of places you've heard of that use FreeNAS for their storage. The one that sticks out in my memory is the United States Navy. But this is something you can install on an old desktop with about 8 gigs of RAM, an 8 gig flash drive, which is where you store the operating system, and as many drives as you can throw at it. I recommend the Western Digital Red drives. They're built for use as a NAS. Something to do with how the caching is different inside the drive. I forget what the deal is exactly. But that's a great option, and this is another place where you can build some really valuable skills. This will let you work with iSCSI. It'll let you work with NFS file shares, CIFS file shares, get up to speed on different kinds of RAID and how they work. Again, things that I use a lot in my job, and I've learned ins and outs of how RAID works because I had a FreeNAS. pfSense, this is my other personal favorite. pfSense is another FreeBSD-based product. It's a firewall. It's a great way to replace that blue box router in your house if you're still using one of those to connect yourself to your cable modem. Lets you work with things like isolation, isolate your lab network from the rest of the household network. Get some experience with VPNs. pfSense supports OpenVPN and IPsec VPNs. And just general firewall experience. This comes with a set of features similar to what you'd see in any UTM in an enterprise today. Content filtering, that sort of thing. And I had open ports in mind to make my TiVo work. And it's exactly like when I've had to open ports in enterprise-grade firewalls at work. The interface is different, but the concepts are the same. So again, build that experience that's attractive to an expectation employer. Something else to consider is a smarter kind of switch, either a smart or a managed switch. I'm partial to this one from TP-Link. This is available for under $100. This gives you experience with things like quality of service, mirroring and span ports, being able to trunk ports together for things. Again, these are things you're going to see in an enterprise. And finally, I'd like to touch on some projects you might want to tackle when you've got a lab set up kind of like this. Security Onion is an Ubuntu-based distribution. Lets you work with doing intrusion detection and some packet analysis. A ton of great tools in there. You would set that up, sucking data off a span port, so you're capturing all the data on your network. You might want to pursue skills in large-scale system automation with Puppet or Ansible or Chef. Google Rapid Response is a favorite of mine. Google developed this in-house. It's their incident response platform. They've open sourced it on GitHub. There's a host component on a server as well as an agent you deploy. And what that allows you to do is remotely capture snapshots of memory, that sort of thing. If you think you've got an infected system, I really think this is the future of enterprise incident response, and it's a great piece of software to get some experience with, and that's available. Memory analysis is a great thing. On VMware virtual machines, you can pause the virtual machine, and there's a file that's linked in the notes, I believe, and I forget the name of the file. But there's a file you can actually pull down straight into volatility or a similar memory analysis tool, and you don't have to do a memory dump or anything like that. You can just take the memory file right out of the VM. Malware analysis, there's a great talk from Coleman Kane on YouTube about using a lab like this for malware analysis. And Swift on Security sysmon configuration. It's a great way to get information off of your endpoints and into a central logging facility. Again, it's the kind of thing I would want to play with and test out in a lab environment before I went to my employer and started putting production. Totally worth it though. I deeply recommend that. If you've got a setup like this, you are well equipped to work your way through Georgia Weidman's book on pen testing, which I also strongly recommend. And finally, one last time circling back to the whole experience thing, Tenable Nessus. A lot of people don't know this, but Tenable will give you a home version of Nessus called Nessus Home for free. It's limited to only scanning 16 IPs, but otherwise it's identical to any other version of Nessus. And it's a great way to build experience with an enterprise-grade vulnerability tool. So, strongly recommend that one to folks. And that's kind of the end of my slides. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
With malware analysis, what would you use? Like community or what kind of analysis tools would you use?
That's a little outside of my area of expertise. I mentioned that because I've seen Coleman's presentation a couple times and I loved it, but I've never been able to get deep into malware analysis. So that I'm not sure about.
Another question with Security Onion. There's that new package that you can use, Stack and Kibana. I'm trying to get into that. And
me too.
Yeah, I'm trying to get sources. Like I don't have any, like at home I don't have any sources to plug into it. Is there any free sources out there that you offer, like?
So you can populate with things that are interesting other than just what the box browsing on, whatever. Probably, but I can't think of one off the top of my head. I mean, you could probably set up something to behave as if it were something doing bad stuff, so you'd have something interesting to watch, but I don't know what that would be. Yes, sir.
So how often do you use rollbacks with VMs as opposed to just shooting it and putting back the original VM? You seem to value that, but I'm curious why.
It depends. I mean, you kind of learn. It's like that first time you lose a term paper in college, and then you learn to hit Control-Save every 15 seconds, so it never happens again. So I'm pretty good about okay, I'm about to do something, let me snapshot this. But that's sort of a thing you have to get burned a couple times before you learn to do that. And
Because otherwise you're from scratch.
And yeah, then you're sitting through the Ubuntu installer again. So, yes.
How much do the number are?
Yeah. Yes?
Is there an advantage to, or a disadvantage to, running pfSense on its own dedicated hardware versus running it to VMs or overhead issues, things like that?
Not if you give it enough resources, I don't think. Now, I kind of prefer to run it on its own physical box, and I can, okay, there's the firewall, I can point to it.
Okay.
But that's just kind of, I don't care. No, I don't think it matters.
So, like, how much resources does that need, say, in a home, like for pfSense?
You could run it on a crazy tiny box. The people that make it, they'll actually sell you, I mean, again, it's almost like a glorified Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty minimal for normal traffic that you have at home.
If you do virtualize it, you'd have the slightly complex. You'd have to do your NAT or your bridge or your network configuration inside the VM.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually think it's easier.
I think you'd probably, if you're starting, you'd probably want to run it on some dedicated hardware.
Yeah.
That way you don't have to worry with your network abstraction layer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yes, sir.
So I run pfSense on some OptiFlex, like little OptiFlex 755s, 2 gigs of RAM or 2 duo, it's been fine. Throw another thing in there and do that. There's also another one that Sophos XG is available.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty decent one, pretty easy to set up for VPN and all that. You can run that virtualized or on hardware as well.
And we haven't talked about real hardware. You can grab Cisco the older 2950s, the slightly less older 2960s. You can find them on eBay cheap, depending upon whether or not you want to pay for the power supply. You have to watch which version of iOS they have. Same with the ASAs. You can grab a 5500 series cheap. Watch the version. If you're going for any of your Cisco certs, you probably want version 15 of iOS. If you just want to play with it, it doesn't really matter. Their licensing is not cheap. It's pretty much beyond anybody's capability for home lab, but as long as you don't want to update it, you're good to go.
Another fun little tool to do in virtualization like this is MHN. It's my honey network. So basically you can roll out some honeypots. I use like Cloud and Cost for some sensors out there. And basically they just get hammered and fired back into your little VM backend there. And you can start collecting files. You can start seeing what kind of attacks are going on the internet. And it's a fantastic, free little tool that you can run and do it on my lab stuff just to watch it. It makes it kind of fun.
Yes, sir.
Could you put these links up somewhere? I cannot read the blue ones.
Yeah, I will make sure the BSides Chattanooga people get a copy of the slides.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Hey, do you know of any software that can be installed, say, in a Pi or some other computer that I can put maybe between my modem and the router and log all the traffic in and out? My router gives some level of logging, but...
So that would be Security Onion. Now, whether you could run that on a Pi, I don't know, but you could probably go to a pawn shop and get an old notebook, and it would be able to handle that. The main limitation there is hard drive size. You can set Security Onion up to basically capture all the packets coming through your network. I think you can even tell it if you see weird files, go ahead and save me a copy of all those too. So it very quickly will burn up a 1 or 2 terabyte hard drive. You're like, oh, that's all my traffic. But it's ones and zeros. How big could it be? But no,
it is. No, we're sifting that out of there and putting it in Apache Metron, which is an open source kind of data lake analytics for cybersecurity. And I do have a little cluster for that. But is that passed through the Security Onion? So I can set it as a pass-through device?
Well, what you do is do a span or mirror port.
You get a network tab for that.
Yeah.
Oh, network tab?
Yeah, or that's what a span or mirror port on a smarter switch would let you do. It just says, give me a copy of all my traffic out this other port.
Yeah.
And as long as you don't exceed more than 1 gig of traffic on that port, it'll all go to the security.
Do you have a box that has more than one NIC? Anything? A notebook, a laptop, an old desktop?
I can put something to it on, but...
So install any Linux OS on it, bridge those 2 NICs, and then use TCP dump.
Okay.
And as long as your Apache product will accept PCAPs.
Yeah, it does.
And there was recently an article on Gizmodo by Kashmir Hill that she made her house a smart house, and then one of her cohorts basically, they sent everything through a wireless router and looked at everything that the house spoke. But part of what he did, and there's a corollary to that article where he explains what he did, is he took all the stuff and he fed it to a Google Analytics thing.
Yeah.
And he basically got summaries and made it into a dashboard so you can see stuff real easy.
Right.
And, I mean, he published all that stuff, so you should be able to get that real easy.
Nice.
It might be good to steal ideas from it at the very least.
Yeah, what was the name of it?
Kashmir Hill, and it was in Gizmodo, and she made a smart home. She made a smart home, and they were looking to see how much stuff the smart home said. And then everything basically talked back to the mothership between every 3 minutes and every twice a day. Like everything. It's scary. But the point is, the guy said how he did it. He basically, in their case, they took like a Raspberry Pi, used everything wireless, sent it through that. But the harder part, the more interesting part, was using the Google Analytics and some cheap kind of AWS instance or something to, see what was going on in real time. So the reporter, who wasn't the gearhead, she does great work, but she was having this other person do it for her, so she wanted to see what was going on so she could understand what she was testing.
Okay.
So,
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Just from a ease of use standpoint, would you recommend, I'm a total beginner in this realm, so would it be smarter just to put T2 type VM or hypervisor on something with an OS just because you get a GUI and things like that? Or
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I would start with just VirtualBox or one of the VMware products on whatever notebook you got. Get your feet wet with that. You can, again, probably run 2 or 3 VMs at a time. That's enough to run Kali and something we're pen testing against. And that's where I would get started.
Okay.
Absolutely.
yes. Top 3 common mistakes people make setting up their home lab. It's like, you probably tried to cover that for us, obviously.
Trying to do too much too fast. I definitely agree with the idea of I would start with pfSense as a physical box, simply because it gets complicated trying to do it the other way. And third one, I don't know.
Okay, cool.
Just looking for your reaction.
Sure. No.
Oh, I mentioned the WD Reds. So for those of you who want to get it on a budget, the subreddit Data Porter has an FAQ on how to get Reds for cheap. And so the technique is Best Buy has a branded external hard drive called the Easy Store.
It's a red in there, right?
You shuck it open and you got a red.
Yeah.
And the whole guide of which model to get, they go on sale sometimes for like $150, $140, a lot cheaper.
If there are no more questions, I appreciate it. You guys have been a great audience, and I love to talk about this stuff. Please feel free to hit me up throughout the day. Thank you.
Awesome.